That's no moon. It's a space station.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Just a quick reminder, Hopewell Farm CBD. If you guys are looking to try a new CBD, you can get 10% off all of their products with promo code Journey to Truth 10. That link is below in the description. They have some topical ointment, some CBD oil, and it's actually really amazing for your pets too. I used it for my dog for years, and there was no better CBD for her. So if you're in the market to try some new CBD, I highly recommend it. All of their plants are grown with intention. It's homemade, it's organic. And we just can't say enough about Eric and Nancy who run Hopewell Farm. And they were a vendor at our conference, Rebels of Disclosure, every year so far, actually. So take advantage of that discount. You get 10% off all their products with promo code Journey to Truth 10. And that link is below in the description. Today, we are joined by our good friend, Daryl James. I'm actually down here in Florida, staying with him temporarily. We just got done filming his part for our upcoming documentary, which we're really excited about. It's going to be it's a monumental task. It's a very ambitious project, but we're going to do it, and we can't wait to tell you guys more about that whenever we can. And before we get into everything, how you doing over there, Aaron?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Great. Yeah.
Good.
So here, the reason we're here today is because I've been hanging out with him, and we're just cruising around town, and he just starts telling me stuff from his 20 and back, and not even his 20 and back, this time in the military too. Just memories and stuff that he's never shared before. And I'm like, why have you never said it? So like, oh, I don't know. I feel like it was, it wasn't time, or it was inappropriate, or just random stuff that he's been, saying. That, we'll be driving and you'll see something that might trigger a memory. So I just been taking notes. So this
is gold. This is a show.
Right. Yeah. So This interview is actually going to be all over the place because all of these are just random memories. And when I asked Daryl if he wanted to do this, he's like, what do you mean? Kind of like filling in the blanks. So I was like, yeah, that's actually a great episode name too. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Is filling in the blanks on some of his testimony, some of it's incredible stuff, and some of it's, I guess, controversial, you could say. But we're going to go ahead and cover it anyway. And anyway, how you doing, Daryl? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah. So anyway, how's it been having me as a house guest? Am I getting on your nerves yet?
Just a little bit.
Like, I can't wait to get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
Right.
You're earning your keep.
Right. Yeah. He's got me in the grass. He's
mowing the lawn, helping out with fixing things like that. Yeah.
Just doing all kinds of housework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, do all the slave driver.
Right.
Slave driver James. So yeah, anyway, so basically the other night, we'll start with the guitar story, I think, because that's what you first told me. And I was like, why have you never shared this? This is really good information. And I don't know, maybe I'll just let you explain kind of why you never shared this before, and then you can go into telling that story.
Well, with my guitar teacher, it was I wouldn't say it's like a new memory, but a newer memory, I would say. Probably why I didn't share it. And it was basically, we just came back to Earth. It was Sporu and I, and we actually landed a small craft in his backyard, and it was cloaked. Walked through the fence, knocked.
And why were you doing this first?
Well, I was teaching the children, their children, the Tibetan Pleiadian children, the instruments, guitar. And I knew other things like violin. I knew, harmonica. I knew piano, and these were the things that my guitar teacher knew as well. His minor in college was violin and things like that. But he was primarily a classical guitar teacher. And yeah, we walked through the fence, walked around to the front yard, so we didn't seem strange, and knocked on the front door. And I said his name, and I said, "Do you recognize me?" And immediately he said yes. And I said, "Can we come in?" And he said yes. And we sat down at the kitchen table, and I pointed at Sporu and I said, she doesn't look like us, does she? Like, her eyes are a little too big, aren't they? She's similar, but not quite. And he said, yes. And I pulled out a smart glass pad and I started showing him the, star constellations they were from. And I was pulling images directly out of it, almost like 3D images and things like that. And I told him that, when I first joined the program, that things were difficult for me. And, I went away into, I was with the reptiles, the draconians, and I didn't know that was going to happen in the beginning, and it was difficult. I promised him that wouldn't happen to him. And I basically asked him that if he wanted to become like a civilian contractor, for the Solar Warden project, in the sense of being a music teacher and to teach these people and the children and things like that music, because it was just too much for me. It was becoming too much of a daunting, I was a pilot and I was trying to teach music and everything else. So I wanted him to be like the primary, like, music teacher, music instructor. And and I just showed him everything. I told him about the 20-year impact. I said, you're going to see things you never thought you would see again. You never thought you would see. And then I said, and we'll bring you right back here, and you won't remember anything. And that's one of the drawbacks to it. But I promised him, no harm would come to him, and he would experience things he had never experienced in his life. And he basically said, and I'll be here. I'll come back right here, right now, at this moment. And I said, yes. And he said, can I, call my family? And he asked if he could call his kids and, his ex-wife and everything like that. And I said, yes. And he called everybody up and he agreed, and we went, and we just walked through the back door. I believe it was like a sliding glass door, and we walked into the cloaked ship.
And so he actually asked his family, or told his family, that he was going to?
He didn't tell his family he was going. He just wanted to make one last phone call and tell them, that he loved them and everything like that. And then we left.
And so was he, like, what was his reaction when you told him about all this stuff? Did he have any background in ETs? Did he believe in that stuff?
I wouldn't say he believed in it, but I just remember as a kid, he was always a person you could talk to anything about. And he was kind of understanding. And he really didn't ever put you down in any of your beliefs or anything like that. He was just a very open-minded person to begin with. And at the time, I didn't really recognize him. I had to go through my own records, because I really didn't. My memory was kind of choppy of my life on Earth and things like that. And I basically had to go through like records to find him, and I tracked him down. Yeah.
So that brings me to my next question: is how many memories of Earth did you have while you were in the programs? Because that's interesting. Not many people talk about that.
Yeah, and I did have memories, and that was one of the reasons, because when I was in Dark Fleet, I had all access to music because I was a musician and I played for them. Most of the other guys I think they only had access to things like classical music and things like that. But I had all access. So on the smart glass pad, I would look at albums and I would look at kind of genres and time of music, and it would remind me of my parents. It would kind of remind me of my mother and my father, and I'd be like, this is like a part of me. This is something who I am. And I think that's why music was so important to me, especially like in the 60s and 70s and even 50s and things like that. It was very important to me because it was a way to kind of get back to my roots, kind of track who I was. And it was, I would look at albums and things like that, album covers on the smart glass pad and things like that. And it would remind me of my childhood.
So you actually had access to your records then, and you were able to go hunt down your guitar instructor from school, from here on Earth. So he already knew you from this life.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever you showed up, did you look any different? You looked exactly like yourself. Did that throw him off at all?
I'm sure I was bigger, and I'm sure I was probably, in my late 20s when I should have been, more like in my 40s. And I'm sure that was probably, something else or amazing to him. Maybe I saw a surprise. I'm sure he was surprised to begin with that I was, I was at his house knocking on his door. But, I mean, I knew where he lived. He would have classes sometimes in his house, and I would take classes, in the dining room with him sometimes. But yeah, I'm sure he was surprised. And
so you were just up there and you were like, hey, maybe we could go get this guy. And they came and basically brought him into the programs just to teach music.
Yeah, just as like an independent contractor kind of thing.
You gonna say something, Aaron?
No.
Oh,
no, that's amazing. No.
Right.
But that's the thing about that, because you're telling him exactly what he's getting involved in, and it's his free will to choose to do it. which is so different from the dark programs where they just take
Right.
you or they trick you into it.
Right.
And then you have no idea you're signing up to be a slave and all the horrible stuff. So
And it also,
like, that's how it should be, you know? Yeah.
right. And it reminds me of Tony Rodriguez's testimony when he said they brought those sculptors in from, I think, Europe or whatever to on Syria, sculpt those two horses or whatever. So they're bringing artisans and you know,
yeah,
every profession I think gets brought into programs on some level. You know, maybe they'll come grab a plumber or something too. You never know.
Right.
So this brings me to the next point where the guys on base, when you were talking about Elton John and Billy Joel and stuff, can you tell that story?
Yeah, I was petty officer of the watch, and this is after I came back from the programs and everything. And I was at the quarterdeck, and it was, I don't know, kind of late. It was probably around 10 o'clock at night or something like that. And there was the senior chief with the mustache, skinny guy with glasses. He was an off-world German. And the S3, who was a lieutenant, like fourth in command on the base, and he was a off-world German. He was actually the one that was the first officer on my ship that invited me to dinner, you know, on their world and things like that. And I had dinner with his wife and kids and everything. And yeah, the senior chief came up to the lieutenant, you know, and I was just sitting at the desk and they're in front of me. And he basically said, you know, he's talking about Elton John, like, wow, like Elton John, he's something else. Like, you know, he was talking about him like he never heard of Elton John before. Like they just got back from a concert. Yeah, and it was really strange to me. And I was, but and then I remember like he looked at me, the senior chief, to the lieutenant, you know, and he said, "Isn't he supposed to be with us now?" Like he kind of said it under his breath, like he was surprised I was there. He said, "Isn't he supposed to be with us now?" And you know, lieutenant said, I don't know why he's not with us now." But yeah, they were just talking back and forth about Elton John, like it was something brand new to them. And he, the senior chief came right up to me and he said, "Do you like Elton John?" And I said, "You know, I like Billy Joel, but I'm not really an Elton John fan." But I remember playing things like, you know, I started getting good at, you know, piano and everything like that. That same lieutenant, it was the first officer on the ship, the S3. He like befriended me and he started asking me like, would you like to learn how to play other things? Would you like electrical guitar? Would you like a piano, a keyboard? He was kind of like getting me things because I was like their entertainment, you know, in their bar on the ship. And that's kind of like what I was doing. So I started learning other instruments and playing that. And yeah, they liked things like, you know, Rocket Man and Yellow Brick Road and all that stuff by Elton John. They liked all that. Yeah.
So they had basically as if they never heard of them, which told you that they weren't from here.
It was really weird. Yeah. It was was, I mean, you know, 2004 and these were guys in their 30s. And it was just, you know, and at the time, you know, I was probably 26 or so. And I just thought to myself, like, you know, how have they never heard of Elton John?
How do you not know who Elton John is? Right? That's impossible.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not from here, then all of our stuff that we take for granted is brand new to them until they discover it. Right.
And did you tell them like anything else? Did you say something about Elton John being gay?
No. The S3 said that he goes, you know, because the senior chief was just, you know, floor about Elton John. He was like gushing over him. And yeah, the S3 said, "You know, he's gay, right?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't know that." He's like, "Well, he still makes good music or something like that." So yeah, that was a conversation as well. Yeah.
So these were off-world Germans basically disguised as U.S. Navy?
Yeah, like one was, yeah, and they wore khakis, the senior chief. Yeah, they call them khakis. They're working uniforms for chiefs and officers. And yeah, and the lieutenant, he was wearing his khakis as well. And he wore glasses. They both wore glasses. And this was something I was told as well is, you know, like the senior chief was very skinny, but the lieutenant had a build like that they would have. He was a pretty big guy. Like, you know, he looked like he could bench like 350, 400 pounds. So he was pretty, but he wore glasses. And I asked, you know, the executive officer, Robert, you know, did they do things, kind of tweak their body to kind of help them blend in, make them, you know, speed up their metabolism to make them skinny or give them bad vision and things like that? And he said, yes. And I said, why did they do that? And he said, well, we just can't have a bunch of Ubermen running around on base, can we? So it's kind of a way to help them blend in. Some are overweight, some are skinny. But whenever they're like actually in Dark Fleet, they're all just pretty big men and they don't need glasses or anything like that.
So then this is all actually an extension of Project Paperclip. You were saying how it actually goes a lot deeper than we think with the Warner von Braun stuff, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it goes a lot deeper in the sense that a good portion of the high-ranking personnel on this base were off-world Germans, and they spoke with like a perfect American accent. I don't know if you ever heard a person, from who's German speak English. They actually sound more American than an English person, because our accent comes a lot from Germany. The American accent of English comes from a lot from the Hessians, the German mercenaries that the English hired during the Revolutionary War. That's where we get our accent from. So they pretty much already have like a perfect American accent. And yeah, it's like the doctor on base. I mean, these are like really close, intimate kind of. They know everybody on the base. They know everything about everyone on base. These are these kind of positions. The master chief of the base, who's third in command, the doctor, who's a lieutenant. He was an off-world German. And yeah, and I remember talking to the doctor before I left. I told Robert, let him know who I am, and tell him I know who he is, basically. And whenever I came in for my final checkup before I left the military, he was basically kind of looking down my timeline. He was doing kind of the same thing Robert was, so I caught him doing it. He was trying to see, like, he was like just being quiet, kind of looking around, like I wasn't there, kind of thing. And I said, stop doing that. I knew exactly what he was doing. And he basically, like, he could see how angry I was with them. I think out of all of them, they're the ones I keep the most of a grudge against, even more than the reptiles, is the off-world Germans, because I see them as kind of like a very, it's betrayal. It's like on a biblical level. They're kind of like Judases to me, to their own species. That's how I see them. And he said, we're helping you, don't you? Like he said that. So he kind of almost gave me an idea that there was kind of like a breakaway that broke away from like the Draconians, and that they're actually trying to help Earth now. And it's more complex than you understand. It's kind of like how he explained it to me.
Right. So this would mean that it can't be just Saint Mawgan that has off-world Germans working as U.S. Navy, right? So I would imagine that a number of the military bases all over the country probably have off-world Germans. It's not just Germans that came from Germany in Project Paperclip, right? Mm-hmm. It's actually off-world Germans that were brought here, and they're basically implanted into these bases, probably for the reasons of recruiting people into the programs.
I mean, I would say the underground bases are the only real, on a universal level, like the universe, the game that the universe is playing, the wars that are actually going on in the universe. I would say that they're the only ones that are actually have knowledge of what's actually going on. I would say a majority of the military bases, I mean, I don't know what they are to fund the military industrial complex, Loosh, whatever it is, but I would say it's mostly these underground bases, as far as what I was told, because like this underground base, it was, what was it, to track subs in the Arctic Circle, like the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans. That's what the guys were told who worked in the space. But I mean, the XO told me, it was just like a cover story. And the actual purpose for underground bases is for, a slavery into the secret space program and adrenochrome harvesting. And those are the two main reasons for these underground bases. And it sounds like it's the same thing all around the world, the way he explained it to me. They all have like, these caverns below them where they have, adrenochrome harvesting, and they all, recruit for these secret space programs. And that's like their primary, goal. And it's also all the Stargates and things like that. All the looking glass technology. Every underground base has looking glass technology as well, which is just basically like a portal you can observe, or you can step through the looking glass.
So you can actually step through the looking glass and go somewhere else.
Yeah, you can observe, you can look, you can go in different points in time and observe, and with a certain amount of accuracy, like 94%. But you can also step through and go into that kind of timeline and through the looking glass.
Wow. So, Aaron, did you have any questions before we go on to the next one?
Well, I'm just thinking of like anyone watching this who doesn't maybe hasn't heard you before or doesn't know a lot about the secret space program stuff? Because a lot of times we just kind of, we're so used to it, we just say things and assume that people know what we're talking about. I'm just thinking you're saying off-world Germans, and people are like, what the F are you talking about? What is that? How can someone be an off-world German? Like, what does that mean? So can you explain what off-world Germans means and how do they become an off-world German? And like, just explain that real quick.
Well, the way it's explained to me was like the point of World War II through Germany's eyes was kind of like the whole channeling with Maria Orsic and the Brill Society. That was a real thing. They were actually getting like, you know, higher density beings that were, you know, at a higher like a plane of existence. And they basically told them, you know, go to Antarctica. That they told them the coordinates of where to find all this different tech. They took it all to South America to reverse engineer it. And the whole point of like World War II was just to delay the Allies as long as possible to get all this technology that they could from Antarctica into South America. And then you had that famous photograph of the glowing orbs over the White House. You know, it was on the anniversary of surrender.
In 52, yeah.
Yeah. And that was Germans basically, you know, forcing the United States to surrender, you know, to them. And it was actually Germany that won the war. And that's another part of Project Paperclip that people don't understand is it wasn't just they did it like, you know, in an underhanded way where they infiltrated everything. They did it in a military way. And that was what what those glowing craft were above the White House. They went to the White House, they gave them surrender papers and they signed them. The United States surrendered to the off-world Germans. So they had these breakaway societies. Once over that, you know, they reverse engineered the technology. It was basically like, if you're loyal to the Draconians, the reptiles, they'll give you things. So they gave them a world. So they have their own world. They probably have several worlds from them. And yeah, they you know, they reverse engineered this technology. They were able to go off world, as they call it, and they were able to inhabit different worlds. So yeah.
And also, so do you know if these Looking Glass portals or stargates took them to other planets as well? Could they traverse that way, or was that only on this planet?
They could traverse that way as well, but I mean on a smaller level, on a smaller scale. You couldn't really get the materials and everything you need through Looking Glass. I don't think that would be
right
logistically, sound.
Right. So basically, we have the Germans. And Maria Orsic, so she was channeling these higher density beings, getting these blueprints for this free energy craft, right? These UFOs, these flying discs, and that was the technology that helped them get off planet in probably the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, 30s probably, at least. Yeah, 40s definitely.
And I think that's where people have pause because they can't wrap their head around the fact that humans were off world already in the 30s. Established bases on the moon and Mars and in the shapes of swastikas and things of that nature. And it's just not what we've been told. And so even when they're off world, that might just mean they're from the moon or Mars. And I'm sure other planetary bodies that we're not even familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're just us, but they're genetically augmented in the womb. I was told they live over 800 years. You know, which is what we should live. We should live over 800 years. And because things of poison, you know, they poison our air, water, food. And they're also just a higher plane of existence. So they live longer and they've been genetically augmented in the womb to live longer, to be stronger, to be faster, to be smarter.
Right. Right. So when you say they're looking around, seeing down your timeline, is this just like a psionic ability or like how are they actually doing that?
Well, I mean, it's just the whole time it's an illusion. It's real, you know, like time really isn't, it doesn't really exist in the way you think of it. As long as like, if somebody can do this, as long as they're in your presence, as long as they're like with you, they can actually look down your timeline. And if you're like a higher density being and you know how to do this yourself, you can look down your own timeline. Like I remember most ETs knew when they were going to die and it was just something they accepted. You know, maybe it was something they tried to change, but I mean, in the long run, sometimes you just can't change things, and that's just the way it is. But it was just a part of being in this higher consciousness that it really didn't frighten them. I guess it would, in the sense that a third density being. But yeah, the real you never dies, though. So why would you fear death? You know, exactly.
Like nothing.
Yeah, the flesh dies, but yeah, the consciousness that lives on.
Right.
Right.
And then you actually had, when you got back from the programs and you're living in Florida, you actually had a roommate at one point where you saw her able to look down your timeline, right?
Yeah, yeah. I had a roommate and I was helping her get a car on like the Atlantic side of Florida. And as we were coming back, she was driving. And a lot of people can do this stuff too when they're driving. It was just like she was driving and she was like, wow, he was in the secret space program. Like she was saying stuff that I had no idea that like she knew. And I think this is when I did my first interview with James. So it could have been maybe she was messing with me. She saw this, but I don't think so because I don't think she looked at things like this. But yeah, she was, and then he's going to do this and then that. And she was just kind of like going through and I was looking at her and I could tell she was like going down my timeline. But yeah, it was just, she could do it. Yeah. And well, once I saw her doing it, and it's something I could do too, as well when I was younger, but it's almost like for me, it was, as they say, like the higher self, you know, it's kind of like that part of you is doing it. And it's almost like you don't even know you're doing it, if that makes sense. You're like, you're doing it, but then when you kind of snap out of it, you really don't remember. And then maybe it might be like a day or two later, where you're like, oh yeah, I forgot I did that. Because it's not like the consciousness that's here. It's like the one above you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess let's jump to the part where you actually saw a therapist when you retired from the Navy, right? And they set you up with a therapist, and tell that story and how that went.
Well, yeah, like I went to a therapist, and you know, I went to one before, and from the VA, and that was the man I talked to from the Army, and he was the one that completely like, he's like, I believe you. He's like, he pretty much knew what the military does to you, how they use you, and everything else. And then I had other. He got transferred somewhere else, and that was like the difficult thing is in the VA they get transferred after like 4 to 6 months sometimes. So you're always seeing like a new therapist, so you're really not making any kind of headway as far as your healing, in my opinion. And so I hadn't seen anybody for years, and then eventually I went back to the VA and I had said I'd like to get a civilian. I'd like to get contracted to the outside and get a civilian therapist. So that way, hopefully, I can stick with this person for at least a year to try to get these things figured out. And I talked to him, and I told him I was writing a book, and he's like, "Well, tell me what the book's about." So I started just telling him about it, and he was saying certain things, I don't know, liability things, like things like that, like legal liability. And so I talked about the 5G tower and everything else like that. And
so basically you told him your whole story of everything that happened.
Pretty much. Yeah, like all the way up until the point, where I first saw the reptile. And he said, our time is up, and the hour was up. He's like, oh, I can't wait to hear more. And, I'll just go online, make another appointment, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. And I said, okay. And I went online, I made another appointment, and then I got an email back from him saying like something to the effect of, due to the circumstances of your situation, I can't see you any further. Like, I'll call the VA and have them find another therapist for you. And as soon as I heard that, I called the woman that I talked to, and then she never called me back. So it's just like after like I told someone about this, that was very. I'm sure it was probably something. If they just thought I was crazy, then they'd try to give me another therapist. But I think it was just something that they actually kind of believed, and I was breaking some sort of protocol. So they just completely,
Was it like,
yeah,
they didn't want to be complicit and get in trouble with you, kind of thing?
Well, yeah, like, or they just didn't want, yeah, exactly. Like things from a top secret base and everything like that. And I've talked to another therapist before about Michael Aquino and the torture and stuff like that. And immediately he was like, whoa, like this happened. And yeah, I said, yeah. But then as soon as I, mentioned it was an underground base and top secret, he just kind of dropped it. So it's like they act like they care, but as soon as they find out that you're like a certain level of secrecy, then they just drop it and they don't care.
And it seems to me like they don't want you sharing this information to this therapist that's real information. And now, I mean, essentially you're red pilling him.
Mm-hmm.
And then if he starts to believe it, then that changes everything because he's going to have questions. And they don't think they wanted to stop that ripple effect, right?
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure that's a big part. I mean, we do have like a shared consciousness. And once enough people start waking up, then, everybody will start waking up. And I'm sure that's something they don't want.
Yeah. It's already happening. So
yeah.
No one can stop it. But, they're going to try. Right.
So this is just a quick side note. that something you told me while we were driving the other night, that a lot of people say that they remember you from the programs, right? And then you ask them a question back, basically to test them to see if like it's a legitimate memory or not. And you asked, oh, well, what was my name? And they tell you what your name was, but you actually had a different name in Darkfleet.
Mhm.
So that's how you know if the person actually had a true memory of you or not. And so maybe you can tell that story and what your name was.
Yeah, like, well, when Robert was explaining to me, I was in Darkfleet, and he said they changed your name, and I said, why did they do that? He said, to take away your identity. That's what he said. And I said, well, what was my name? And he said, the same as mine. His name was Robert, and he said, but it was pronounced Robert. He said your name was Robert, and I think it was like Klugel or something like that. Robert Klugel, I think is how he pronounced it. And yeah, and that was like a lot of people will say, you know, hey, I remember somebody named James, you know, in the programs in the Dark Fleet, but that wouldn't have been my name. My name would have been something more to the effect of like Klugel and not James.
Right. I just thought that was an interesting side note.
Yeah.
Just be, you know,
Yeah.
for anyone who's like, yeah, I remember you, Daryl, but you weren't even actually, that was a different name,
Mhm.
different identity.
Right.
Okay, so going down the having the ability to see down your timeline and actually telepathic ability, which you still have, which I didn't know that, but if the other person can use telepathy, you're able to communicate with them even today.
Yeah, and it's also like you have to find kind of like their emotional wavelength as well. Like, if you can find someone that's on the same emotional level as you, you can immediately and they can do it. You can immediately do it. But if it's like somebody's kind of like at a different frequency than you, you kind of have to find their frequency before they can do it. And I've heard people say that it's all emotion and things like that. But no, like the way my family did it, and I met like, you know, my mother's wake, you know, I met my half brother Chris, and he was with his girlfriend, and I invited him over to our table to, you know, talk to us, and they sat down, and they were just very quiet. My sister was mostly talking to other people, and I heard him say, you know, to his girlfriend, "Can you do it? Can you do it?" He just kept on just saying that, and I looked over at them and I nodded my head. And he said, "You could do it. You can do it." And so it was like, you know, we immediately already had that kind of same emotional wavelength to where it wasn't difficult. I knew exactly. He was just wondering if I still remembered how to do it. And he was like one of my half brothers from my father's first marriage that, you know, knew how to do those things.
And your dad taught you how to do this, right?
Yeah. And it was just very natural. It was just, I think all kids can do it. If their parents can do it, I think all kids have the potential of being able to do it.
Right.
And it just seems like as you get older and, you know.
Yeah, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's a story from your childhood that actually doesn't have anything to do with the programs, but I find it very interesting because potentially, so this lady wanted you to marry her daughter because of who you were.
Mhm.
She was able to see either your bloodline or at a soul level who you were, and she wanted you to marry her daughter for that reason. And she did something to you. Can you tell that whole story? Because I think it's actually important.
Yeah, there was this girl who was in high school, and I think I was in middle school. She was a freshman. She was my sister's friend, and yeah, she spent the night at the house, and I think I was like 11, and she was like 14 or something like that. And I saw her, like, you know, she had her head kind of like that on the bed, like laying on her stomach. My sister walked out, and I was in the bedroom across, and I walked in, and I immediately knew she was a telepath. And I said, you know, and I was asking her things if she had a boyfriend, if I could kiss her and things like that. And she was like my first kiss. Anyways, it came up to be my sister's birthday, which was Halloween. So her friend invited me, you know, over to the house, you know, for Halloween, like a, you know, like a slumber party kind of thing. And so we all went over, and she immediately grabbed my hand and pulled me into her mom's bedroom. And her mom was like putting on kind of like an outfit, like looked like a cross between like Stevie Nicks and Elvira. She was like in the mirror, like putting on makeup and things like that. And she said, "Mom, this is him." And we were just speaking telepathically. And she said, "And you say the father can do it?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, "What about the mother?" She said, "Not as much." And she said, "And the sister?" And she said, "No." And the woman kind of like grabbed me by the chin, you know, like, you know, I was a little kid, and kind of lifted my head up and locked eyes with me. And all of a sudden, like the room kind of turned like orange and red, and it looked like it was on fire. It was just like in yellow and like flecks of blue and things like that. And I remember I heard the girls outside screaming who were like in the living room, like the TV room. They started screaming. And the woman kind of shook my head and snapped me out of it. And she said, you know, you're a powerful little boy, don't you? And I said, yes. And she said, good, now go play. And then when we went out, I remember all the girls, like my sister didn't see it because I think my sister was just kind of shut off to things like that. But like 2 or 3 of the other girls said, did you see that? Did you see that? It looked like the whole house is on fire. And they said, yeah. And so it was the next day, and she said, Jen, why don't you, you know, have the girls go outside and play out back. She goes and play. And she said, I want to talk to Daryl. I want to talk to Daryl. And so, you know, we started talking, and, you know, there was a car and I could do things like this. I remember there was like a toy, like Corvette on the shelf. And I said, can I see it? She said, yes. And I started looking at it, and I said, your husband had a car like this, you know, and your husband hurts people. And I found out later from my sister that, you know, he was high ranking, like Italian mafia that like lived close to our neighborhood. And he was coming down from New York and had a vacation kind of house in Florida. And yeah, he would hurt people. And I could look down his timeline and I could see him like, you know, hurting people and doing things to people. And yeah, she started telling me about her faith. She was Jewish. She was a Kabbalist and all this other thing. She practiced this other kind of alternate kind of Jewish religion. And she said, she wanted me to marry her daughter. She said, I did something to you. I don't know what I did, but I did something to you. And she was right. It was like, for years after that, I felt like I was hallucinating. It was just like colors were different, sounds were different. I felt like I could see people that weren't there. I felt like I could see different things. And I found out later through Robert and things like that. He said that's what was the reason why the density chamber didn't put me down in a 3rd density properly, is because she put me partially into 5th density on accident. And when it happened, it was weird. Whenever the whole thing happened with the aura exploding, and it felt like what it felt like, it was, I could see, I think I saw like, you know, Mother, like the elder, like Taigetan woman, like Pleiadian, and I saw like others kind of surrounding her. And it was almost like something, it felt like that they were kind of doing to me to kind of like get me ready for this or whatever this was. It was like they kind of like put, even though it was like difficult and kind of screwed up my life a bit, it was just something that had to happen to go to the next level. And so yeah, like I looked down the timeline to see if I married, you know, her daughter, what would become of this. And eventually, like I dropped out of high school, I think at 15, and I married her. I think she was like 18 or 19 or something like that, or 18. I think I was 15, she was 18. I married her. We went to New York. We had like
you were 15.
Girl.
Wow.
Yeah, we had like a girl and 2 boys, because I was like a freshman, and he was like
this didn't actually happen.
This didn't actually happen, but when you go down the timeline, it's like you're actually like living that. That's how it felt to me. It was like I was in this life. This was the life I was in. I chose to do this. And
it's interesting. It's just interesting why, you know, in that timeline you guys would have gotten married so young. Like there's something to that, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, her mother seemed to have this kind of idea that whatever I had in my bloodline, she wanted in hers.
And might lock you down quick.
Yeah, and it was like the mom's idea, 100%. Because even after this happened, and like I was kind of after I saw the timeline. I looked on the timeline and went to New York with them, and I became kind of almost like an advisor to the father. We would meet like in warehouses or docks, and I remember I told this to Jen later on before she left New York. I told her I saw all this stuff. She said, "Yeah, a lot of business happens in the dock." That was the woman's name. I should. That was the girl's name. But I was trying not to say it. But yeah, I told her later, and yeah, we would go to the docks and everything like that. And the mom would be like in a different room in this warehouse, like maybe like just a small room. I would be telling her things telepathically to her, like if the guy had a gun on him, what his intentions were, because she got me really good. She knew how to like heighten all my abilities, and she would like practice with me and make me better and better. And I was getting better at it. So I would tell everything to her when she was in a different room, and she had a microphone, and the husband had an earpiece. and she would tell everything to him, like, so he knew exactly what was going on. And I guess people got wise to it. And eventually I got shot. Like a guy, I said, he has a gun above his right ankle. He's going for the gun, and it was too late. And he pulled out a gun and he shot me in the chest. You know, he shot the man back. The man died. But I remember I could see my own funeral. I could see, him crying over me and things like that, and Jen crying over me. And I could, and then I went to my father had the heart attack. So that kind of seemed like that was part of his fate, no matter what. At that time of age I was at 19, when I would have been 19. And then after that, my mother committed suicide through pills. And then my sister was all by herself. And it was just like this horrible kind of fate, this outcome I kind of saw happening to my entire family. It was going to ruin my entire family. And I looked at her and I said, I can't be with Jen. There's like no way. Like, there's no way I could be with Jen. This is impossible. I can't do this. And she would still try to like kind of like do things like, why don't you go in Jen's room? Like if I was over the house, because I used to play with her sons and things like that. And she would do like kind of weird stuff like, why don't you go talk to Jen? Like, why don't you go into her room? It was just
He was trying to manipulate you to be with her. It's still, yeah.
Yeah. And I even told her, I looked at her, I said, I can't be with Jen. I'm sorry. I said, this is going to destroy my family. I was like, no way. I can't do this.
What was her response to that?
Well, she said, we'll help you. She kept on trying to convince me. She's like, we'll stop it. We'll help you. And I kept on looking down the timeline and it still happened no matter what I said. Nope. And I said, I can't do it. Yeah. She kept on saying, we'll help you. We'll stop this.
So you got out of that, I mean, you just chose a different path, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was still just as interesting of a path, but you're still here, luckily. So, I mean, that's all absolutely fascinating. Now you know why when I'm driving around with Daryl, he's telling me all this stuff. I'm like, dude, we gotta record this.
Why have you never said this?
Right.
Yeah.
This isn't just normal stuff, but I also wonder who this woman was and what she did to you and how she had that ability. You said she was a Kabbalist, right? And
yeah.
So I just wonder who she was, really.
I mean, I don't know. It's just, I think once you get, I mean, I've heard of that. Once you get really high up in the Italian mafia, a lot of times they do want you to like marry into like you hear that a lot, with like Goodfellas and things like that. Henry Hill, he had a Jewish wife. It's like they want you, and even when you get higher up in the mafia, it becomes almost like kind of like a Catholic black magic kind of thing when you get really high mob.
So, I mean, when you really, know what's going on the planet, every single institution, and that includes every mafia, at the top of the pyramid is what is connected to the deep state cabal, Illuminati, whatever term you want to call it, that does black magic, that does all these occult, things, and they have this knowledge, and they're using it for the negative, like to empower themselves and enslave humanity and harm humanity and blah blah blah. So yeah, the mafia is definitely used by the cabal. So that makes perfect sense to me when you said that. I'm like, oh yeah, of course.
Right.
Of course they're connected to that, and she's trying to recruit you to like be with her daughter, and because of your abilities and stuff and who you are.
Yeah,
it makes perfect sense to me.
Right. So yeah, this is incredible stuff. We're gonna jump around again to a new point in time. So I guess this was when you got back from the programs, you were on base and you saw something that maybe you shouldn't have saw. I don't know, the person that was wearing all black. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, like I kind of befriended this, we started drinking earlier in the day, and it was just one of those kind of things. And I befriended like this English guy, and we went up to his room and he had all like kind of this American football, paraphernalia. He had like actual helmets, like Buccaneers and Giants, like back in those days, they were like $800, like the actual NFL helmets, and he had real jerseys, pinned to the wall. And we were watching, just Schwarzenegger movies or something like that. We're watching Die Hard and like action movies. And we were sitting on a couch, and there was a window right behind us, and he was on the 4th floor of the barracks, the top floor. And he said, look, he turned around, he looked out the window and he said, look, and they were cracked open. And there was somebody with a black hooded like sweatshirt with black gloves, black sweatpants, and even black sneakers. And he had somebody like it looked like a body rolled up in a military blanket, like one of those dark gray wool military blankets. And he had him over his shoulder and he was carrying them. And immediately I said, should we help him? You know, because they looked like a guy like carrying a corpse over his shoulder. And he looked at me and he said, no, it's too late for him. We can't help him. And it was strange. It was like kind of like a chill when it went down my spine. And what that was, now that I look back on it, at the time I didn't know, but that was somebody who came back from the 20 year and back. And that's how they bring you back to your bed. You know, they wrap you up in this blanket and they wait till like 2 or 3 in the morning. And then they take you back to your room. And and I think that it was probably that first class petty officer with the blonde mustache, the overweight guy, because I think that's what he did. That was pretty much his job, is he would bring people back. And I met that guy in a bar, and that was like the day, like the Sunday. You know, like I said, I left on Friday, I missed Saturday, and I came back on Sunday. Was when I came back, and it was Sunday evening, and I saw him in a bar, and I went up to the goth, because she was talking to me like on Thursday or something, and she seemed really interested in me. And so I was like, I had a buzz and I was kind of flirting with her, and she immediately got like really scared because this is the woman I told her I was going to kill her in the future. And she just walked away. She looked really scared. She walked away. And I started walking through the pub, and I saw this first class petty officer sitting in a booth by himself. And he started laughing. He said, Aquino fucked you up, man. And he started telling me all this stuff. He's like, I carried you back to your room, and he shouldn't have done things like that to you. And he was like, yeah. And I felt bad for what he did to you. So I helped you out. I gave you a lot more muscle tone. You should go to the gym and keep it up. And then when I woke up, like I said, I was very toned, very muscular when I woke up from the 20 year and back. And he was the one, he felt bad for me for, being tortured for 2 days. So he thought he'd kind of like help me out, put me in a med bed, and tone up my muscles and everything. But yeah, I believe that was the guy, and that's how they returned them, at least on this base from the 20 year and back. They would just wrap them up in like a military blanket, walk them back to the room, and just put them in bed.
Yeah, that's incredible information, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We're just getting more pieces of the puzzle, and it's all coming together. And the fact that you saw that is no coincidence. And, and you had the memory of the guy, or the experience of the guy telling you, yeah, I carried you back to your room. So obviously you can connect those dots. But
I remember too, there was a guy who was he worked in the mail room, and I was out in the barracks, and I was out in the hall of the barracks walking somewhere, and he was like in the hall, like talking to someone. He was saying like, I was in these mines in the moon, he was like talking about it. And I hear that's common for someone to remember like the first day or two. And he was like, this was real. This happened to me. And he was kind of like going through, almost like, and I don't know how to explain, almost like a panic attack. He was like really freaking out. He didn't know like what to do with this information he had in his head. But I mean, you would see things like that every now and again of guys who would remember. I remember that. Yeah. Other guys who remember the first day or two of the 20 year and back.
Right. Wow, this is incredible stuff. So we're going to jump to the next topic, which is, okay, so when you were working out at the VA gym, you mentioned you overhearing conversations of other people that were like essentially time travelers or in the programs as well. And one of the guys actually was talking to you about investing in hydrogen. And I find this very interesting because I think there's something to it. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, it was a guy who looked like Mike Pence. He lives in my neighborhood, like a few blocks from me. And he was at Bay Pines VA, which is where I went to like work out and things like that. And yeah, this other gentleman who probably was like a retired officer in these programs, he said, "Hey, you're from the future, aren't you?" And this guy looks like Mike Pence said, "How did you know that?" And he's like, "I used to work with you guys, on the base I was on." So he's this alternate timeline that I don't believe is going to happen. It seems like Robert was part of that Mike Pence timeline. He said these things changed and everything else, but for some reason, and I remember like Robert telling me about this guy because as he was looking down my timeline, he can kind of see down other people's timelines, if that makes sense. Like people who I interacted with in my life, he could look down their timelines, and he said the way he got like this time travel technology is his brother worked for a company that had it. And they realized that the timeline was going to collapse. So they both went back in time to like where we are right now today from around 2580 or so.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It's so crazy that people from an alternate timeline that collapses or that ends up not even happening can come back in time and actually live in a different timeline
and still exist.
Exists because it's like, well, wait, if their timeline never happened, how are they still alive? But there's it
Right.
seems like that's possible with time travel still.
Yeah.
It's
And
interesting.
I saw him in front of his house one time, and we were talking about investments. And he said, listen to me. He's like, all this solar power and wind power, it's nothing. He said, it's going to be nothing in the future. He said, hydrogen is it. He said, the hydrogen is going to be the key element, the key, power source of the future. He was just trying to like put this in my head. He's like, you should invest in the hydrogen. You should invest in the hydrogen. He just kept on saying that to me.
Right. And like
to
just
know.
basically stressing the importance, like we don't realize how important it's going to be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, he said it's going to power everything.
and interestingly enough, countries are going hydrogen. Germany just went all hydrogen, right? Or they're transitioning hydrogen, their cars anyway, hydrogen. Australia as well. And then I think Billy Carson has been talking about a lot about
He talks about it all this.
he's
the
like,
time.
He's like, by 2030, the hydrogen car is the way of the future. He's like, the electric car is trash, that's what that guy told you also, right? He said solar and electric is trash, basically.
Yeah, he said that's not going to be used in the future. It's not efficient. He said hydrogen is the way to go.
What did he say was wrong with solar energy? Did he say?
He said it just wasn't efficient enough. It just wasn't, for the amount. He didn't go into detail, but I'm just guessing for the amount of land that you need for all those solar panels and the power that you get, and
It's not. And to build those things, the materials you need to build, like, it's just not an efficient or sustainable thing to do. If you're gonna go, I mean, there's so many other free energy that we already have. That's the problem. And this hydrogen is just one of them. That's the thing. But at least they're doing, at least one of them is happening. But there's, I mean, going back to Tesla and even really before Tesla, and obviously in ancient times, there was free energy being used, 0 point energy, and there's many different ways to extract energy from the 0 point, let alone just hydrogen or other things that we don't need to be paying to live on the planet that we're born on, which makes no sense unless it's enslaved. Right. That's a good sign to me that we're going towards something that means that is a very positive timeline that we're on.
Yeah, and I think investing in hydrogen wouldn't be a bad idea. And because I was talking to somebody who said that these companies are being forced to go green. Like they have to go green in certain tax breaks, which means they have to be a certain percentile of like, you have to be so green or you don't get this tax break, right? And the only they're limiting, they're expanding those restrictions to the point where it's like unless they're being forced to go hydrogen, or otherwise they won't fit in that bracket, right? So what's going to happen is like they're gonna all of these major corporations, because of the climate hoax, is actually they're forcing these people into going hydrogen. And there's motors being developed, as we know, that are not combustible. So what they're doing is, it's going to be, regardless, it's going to be the way of the future, I think. And all these major corporations are going to go hydrogen, which means all of us are going to go hydrogen. So investing now, I think that guy was onto something, because we're already seeing it play out. So,
yeah, and we all know the story of different people like Gary Webb in the '80s who made the thing where you can run your car on water, which is hydrogen, for free, or just using water. Right. And then they killed him, obviously. And he's not the only one, by the way, who's invented that and then has been taken out, and then it just disappears and no one hears about it again. It's like, so finally we're getting somewhere with that, where it's like, that's a really good sign to me, because the control system doesn't want that. Obviously they want to keep the gas, coal, and oil. But here's the problem with that is, like, that's not sustainable for the planet, because the planet is dying from all the stuff we're doing to it. And that's why the cabal, they had all their plans to, like, we're going to build these underground bases, start a nuclear war, kill everything on the surface, and then come back up later, and it'll just be us or whatever. But that time, we're not on that timeline, obviously. Like, that's not being allowed to happen. So they're realizing, like, we have to switch to a sustainable thing, and we're not being allowed to do all these crazy New World Order plans.
Right. So all the indicators are pointing,
and all that. So.
Right, and all the indicators are pointing to that being hydrogen. So anyone,
right.
If you feel, I mean, we're not telling you this isn't financial advice or anything like that, but it's just interesting to take note of. So,
Right. Well, I mean, it makes sense. We live on a planet that's what 70% water, you know,
Right.
so our bodies are basically around that percent water. Like, it's just the most logical next step to go to a hydrogen based energy, you know,
Right.
just the most logical next step.
Okay, so jumping forward, when you were talking to Robert, he told you a couple of things health related that I found interesting that I don't know if you've ever spoken about live or not before, but he talked about waterfalls and sunscreen. And I'll let you expand on that.
Well, yeah, he told me that something about the frequency of a waterfall. Like if you stand under, you know, like a small waterfall for an hour every day, and even for just a week, an hour every day for a week, many illnesses would be cured, including like cancer and things like that. He said there's something about, I don't know, the constant water pouring over you, the sound of it, the entire just, the entire experience of the standing under a waterfall. I mean, he said if you do it for like an hour every day, even if it's just like for a week, it can cure just about anything, like a waterfall itself, just standing underneath it and letting the water,
including cancer, which I think is incredible. And so what did he tell you about sunscreen?
I mean, he told me that sunscreen, he said like, that's what gives you skin cancer, is the sunscreen itself.
Yeah.
Getting like sunburn doesn't really do it to you. He said if you are going to wear something zinc, like something zinc based, like zinc is fine. He said, I know they are starting to make ones that, they're diluting it with, other kind of natural materials. I think it's tallow and zinc, like a mixture of tallow and zinc. And things like that would be a lot better as far as the sunscreen. But sunscreen itself, he said that actually causes cancer. That's what gives you, because your skin is a mouth. Right. Your skin basically swallows anything you put on it.
You're baking chemicals into your skin. Like how did we ever think that was a good idea? It makes no sense. Of course, it's going to give you ridiculous.
Right. And there's that whole conversation we had about the sun when we did that roundtable, which if anyone wants to go back and watch it, we discuss all this in depth. It's called What They Don't Want You to Know About Our Sun. We just did it right before the conference, right before the eclipse, actually. So if anyone's interested in that, I'd recommend checking that video out. And then I guess the last thing that we have on our notes here is probably one of the most controversial things. But he told you something about the gay rights movement and why that was started. And maybe you could explain to our audience, what he told you that's all about.
Well, he asked me if I ever heard of Harry Hay. And I said no. And he said Harry Hay started the gay rights movement in the 1950s. And he said Harry Hay was CIA. And he said that the entire point of the gay rights movement, and he said that Harry Hay marched to the front of NAMBLA, which is, and I asked what that was. I didn't know. And he said North American Man
Boy Love Association. Yeah.
Yeah. And
pedophilia.
I said that's illegal. Like I was really surprised at the time. I said that's legal, and he said I said why, and he said they want it to happen. And he said he marched to the front of NAMBLA like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, like all the way till he died. And he said that the point of the gay rights movement from day one was to eventually make pedophilia acceptable to the American people. And because he said once the civilization accepts pedophilia, it falls within 100 years. And he said that's how they implement things, is they do it slowly over decades. They just don't do it all at once. It's, let them have, love is love, let them get married and be miserable like everybody else. And, then it becomes, the, what do you call it? Like a gay rights parade where, bringing children to things that they shouldn't see. And then it's like, little kids getting money thrown at them at gay strip clubs and stuff like that. So it's kind of worked way up to that.
Yeah, it's like the frog boiling in the pot of water that they have to slowly, if you turn it up really fast, then it jumps out. But you normalize these things, you get people programmed more and more, conditioned more and more. So then it just becomes, this is just normal. And that's exactly, that's what they've been doing for a long time.
And the fact that those guys came back to this timeline tells me that it doesn't work. I mean, because obviously they're not going to come to another timeline that's going to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So it might seem dark, and it is dark what they're doing. We just did the episode with Leah Ray, which was another controversial episode, but I think there was something there that people should pay attention to. And I think the fact that we're even talking about it and recognizing it is how we change the timeline. It's if we didn't recognize it and it was all still being done like sleight of hand, which they can't do anymore because we're just calling them out every step of the way. So I think it is it's dark, but it's the start. It's what the beginning of this positive timeline looks like, and it might not be the beginning that we would, that's, the ideal start, but it's the start,
Yep.
And is there anything else? Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, this was just, like I said, the fill in the blanks to kind of like, just different things I talk about with people I know that I don't really talk about on the shows. That was the whole point of this. And since you've been, living with me for almost 2 weeks now, you've heard the different things I kind of recall and talk about, and I really don't bring up in the shows very much. But I think we achieved the goals of the show.
Yeah, I think so. And it's been more than interesting riding around with you and just hearing all this stuff. Yeah. I'm literally in the passenger seat of the car taking notes as he's talking. Like, we're going to talk about this on the show. Right?
Yeah.
Wow. We can't forget about that. So, I mean, thank you so much. This has been great. And we just got, like I said, Daryl just filmed his part for our documentary, which is coming up, which is about the Earth-based side of the secret space program and the recruitment process. And we're trying to interview some of the people who have the boots on the ground experience and military credentials. And we can, like people like Tony Rodriguez, where we could actually go to these places that remember and prove things and actually bring some evidence to the table. And it's going to be, like I said, it's an ambitious project, but we're going to do it. And I think it's going to be amazing. So thank you for being a part of that. And, Aaron, did you want to say anything else before we wrap this up?
No.
These guys, go buy your book.
Everyone buy my book if you haven't yet. And thank you so much. And so the Secret Space Program documentary, we're working on it. There's no scheduled like date yet for it being released. We're just kind of like, whenever it's done and whenever it happens. So it might be this year, it might be next year.
Probably,
right?
I would say early next year. And the reason is, for one, we don't want to rush it. For two, to actually interview these people in person takes traveling and money and time,
right.
and coordinating schedules. And there's just, to do it right, it's going to take a little time. But I also feel in my heart that the world's going to be ready for this whenever we release it. And this is going to be one we're going to try to do on like Amazon Prime or wherever we can. We're going to try and do it a little bigger and better than the last one, and to reach more people. And I think that the way things are going right now, like we just saw all the mainstream media platforms announced that Harvard University studies show that aliens may already be here disguised as humans. I mean, come on, the conversation is changing on this planet. So by the time this documentary is done and it finally hits Amazon, I think it's going to be widely accepted. Actually, I have a very strong feeling about that. So, and we're not going to scare people off with some of the crazy details. We're just going to keep it Earth-based and let people know that, hey, these black programs exist and this is what happens and this is how it happens,
Yeah, and even secret space program stuff specifically, I'm seeing talked about a lot more now, and I'm seeing it on like bigger podcasts and bigger shows, them having SSP people. Like I just saw Chris O'Connor was on I think it was Jeff Mara podcast, which is a big one. I was like, wow, that's huge,
Well, and the Y-Files recently did the
Y-Files did a whole show,
which we had a little cameo in.
We had a 3-second cameo in.
But it's happening. It's slowly but surely happening. And I mean, people like Danica Patrick, who has her own podcast now, she's interviewing people like Elizabeth April. And I mean, that conversation, I mean, it's and Joe Rogan having Terrence Howard and Billy Carson on. I know everyone has their opinions about all these people, but regardless, I think there's nothing wrong. Like, when did raising the collective consciousness become a problem? I see nothing but positives from all this stuff. So
Yeah, a lot of people get so caught up in the details that they miss the bigger picture of what it means that this is being talked about on a big platform, and this is being talked and getting out there. Like, that's the most important thing. The details, if some of it's not 100% accurate, like, who cares? It's like, but that people, the ego wants to get so caught up in details and what's right and what's wrong, and the accuracy of things. But like, if the overall message is something positive and that is revolutionary, that needs to happen for the collective consciousness, that's huge. That supersedes everything, in my opinion. And that's happening all over the place now. I'm seeing it, so that's huge. Yeah.
All right. Well, any last words, Daryl?
No, I mean, I'll be here in St. Pete Beach in July for the Disclosure Now conference.
All right. Yeah. Great plug. Yeah. So anybody who doesn't know about that event, it's right here in St. Pete Beach. I think Brian Sang and Arkim Brown, a few others are putting it on. Aaron and I were originally going to be a part of it, but we have prior engagements somewhere else, and they changed the date, so we couldn't be there. But Daryl will be speaking, Tony Rodriguez, a number of our friends. They have like 34 plus speakers, and they're under some extreme censorship right now online and social media, which we've experienced with trying to promote a conference. It's very, very difficult. They don't want people getting together. So we'll put that link in the description below. So go, grab a ticket if you want, and go support those guys.
Yeah, Facebook banned the URL for the conference website. So if you try to share, you can't share out the URL on Facebook. That's insane.
They did that with our Q webinar, I remember. Yeah, I mean.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right, they did.
They just, man, that tells you, and, people could be reporting it, and there might be some drama involved. We don't know, but regardless, I know it's never a bad thing when all of these people get together, and that's the one thing they don't want, and that was the whole purpose for COVID. So go come see Daryl, where he's going to tell, I'm sure, more of his story there, and it'll be an amazing presentation along with many others. So, do you know what day you're speaking yet?
I was looking at it. I don't remember it offhand. Yeah, but it's in July
15th through the 18th.
July 15th to the 18th. Yeah. I couldn't find the calendar, but like, 'cause it's banned on Facebook, as I said. Yeah. So.
Right
on. Well,
there's the day of being, which is right before it, which is also awesome.
Yeah.
So you can go to that too.
And so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you guys all for being here. We love you. We can't do this without you. And I know we haven't done a webinar recently on Patreon. We've just kind of been taking a little break after the conference, and life happens. So we will be coming. We will have another webinar in the works very soon. So stay tuned for that. But we are still uploading content over on Patreon. So it's only $5 to sign up, and we appreciate your support. We can't do this without you. So thank you guys all for being here. We love you. And until next time, have a great evening or day, wherever you are.
What happens when water is exposed to EMF, or wireless radiation? Here's something you may not know. Water is conscious, and it responds vibrationally to whatever it is exposed to. At OMNIA, we've done an experiment where we froze and photographed 3 samples of water. Water which was not exposed to EMF radiation, the baseline, looked like this. Water which was exposed to an EMF field, a 5G radiation field in fact, looked like this. And water which was exposed to EMF that is balanced by the OMNIA radiation balancer looked like this. See the difference? Remember, your body is 70% water. And here's a special offer for the Journey to Truth crowd. Just enter the word TRUTH in caps at the checkout for your 10% discount.